Frontiers Reach is a single-player flight simulator that features missions both in space and in an atmosphere. After the first 25 missions, or sooner if you check the veteran start when creating your pilot, you can command your carrier to go between systems and carry out missions there. The style of the game aims for what the developer describes as retro-futuristic. The development team is listed as Blind Alien Productions. Soliloquy, the primary spokesperson on Steam, says this is a two-man team with help from other contributors. If I say the developer, I'll be referring to him as he's the present representative for the game. When I read the developer logs, I get a sense that he's passionate about this project. However, the game interface, while it does resemble original Fallout buttons and plating, lacks any of that feeling. A player would need to keep in mind that the game was created with the intention to emulate the developer's military experiences. He wanted to make a game shaped by those experiences and break away from the typical arcade shooter. He is almost ready to call it done on the game, and doesn't expect to see further major development on the project, beyond the possibility of multiplayer. I've also written up a list of tips for you if the game sounds like your cup of rocket fuel. Each ship is deliberately meant to look a bit clunky and unwieldy. There are 11 player ships available, and while they all have their own model, they don't appear visually distinct from each other. But there's only so much you can do and still make it resemble a fighter jet, as you will be flying in atmospheric conditions at times. This might be the result of allowing for custom paints, but in general you get two kinds of ships in terms of appearance. Ships that look like misshapen torpedoes, and ships that look like they were a car in a past life. As for painting itself, you'll be limited to selecting 3 predefined sections of your ship and 54 colors to choose from. You may select a pattern and logo, also having pre-designated locations, but you do have the ability to stretch and move the way the pattern lays on top of your ship. Painting your ship doesn't consume any resources, and you can save one design to paste onto a different ship if you want. I can absolutely dig a personal art style, but if a visual identity is important in Frontiers Reach, I think having fewer ships with more style would have been the way to go. A more diverse visual silhouette for ships and more pronounced differences would help them stand out better. You can mostly tell what's supposed to be a bomber or what's supposed to be a fighter, but it's not quite to the level of being a visually striking distinction yet. Origin's Privateer featured only 4 ships, and 3 of them are memorable specifically because they look and pilot so differently. Back to the future, Fallout, the Jetsons. I do have some idea of what retro-futuristic things might look like, from steampunk, dieselpunk to ray gun gothic. According to the developer, Frontiers Reach is aiming for Cold War fighter jets in space. While I mentioned that ships aren't that distinct from each other, they do evoke the appropriate feel for the setting, but nowhere in sight are any other design concepts to evoke that feeling of the future envisioned in the 1940s. Other than the "where's my flying car" concept still carried today, there were many other aspects of that cultural mindset. No one-piece skin-tight suits that the people of the past thought the future would be wearing, no shark fin tails, which were considered fanciful science fiction, rather than dating the obvious retro tastes of today. Ground-based gun and missile towers look like ones from any other flight simulator, such as X-Wing. You'll even fly against carriers that have just a splash more neon and color than ones from a standard science fiction movie. Or do battle over and through space stations that would fit in perfectly with Master of Orion. One of my favorite aspects of Frontiers Reach is that you can actually see your chosen modules and weapons on your ship, whether it's a new radiator, a missile pod, or individual missiles. Even when you're playing the game, you can quite clearly see the missiles deploy away from your fighter.
Initiating launch sequence. Please stand by.
The developer has painted Frontiers Reach with a wide brush, but there are several elements missing to really make each feature pop. Keep this in mind as I cover future sections. But here's one example. The game features stream-safe music, but throughout the game, if you utilize the lock-on feature, you will be hearing beeps, sirens, and a modem for your entire flight. You can adjust the sound volume independent of music, but if you lower the lock-on sounds lower than the music itself, you won't even be able to hear your own engine as you take off from your carrier. Space enthusiasts will be quick to point out that you shouldn't hear anything in space, but games and other media use sound because it's still an informative sense to otherwise be missing out on. The music itself is adequate to listen to, but lacks any variance beyond the assigned tracks for each flight if you should end up repeating a mission either because you failed or playing again or trying to square some footage like me. A rather odd quirk of the game is that you can only adjust the sound settings when you're not flying, which results in tweaking some of the sliders, taking off to listen to some beats, then going back into the carrier to tweak it a bit more. Each mission has a specifically assigned track to it, but if you're lucky, the mission that you're on will have a line of code somewhere in it to change the track to something else. I definitely would have enjoyed a lot more variety, but this shouldn't get in your way if you're only playing the game once. In order to fully experience the soundtracks, I would turn the sound and voice to minimums, and sit around in space listening to the beat. The music player in the game would have been nice, and from what I can tell, the music, while appropriate for the setting, nothing popped out as jaw-droppingly amazing. Only one time did something feel off to me, and that was during Chapter 18, where I feel it goes from gritty ambience to, I don't know what this is. Anime? Electronica? You tell me.
Looks like you finally caught the attention of the long.
Negative in the sound department would be the music while in the carrier, which is a very short, violin-like hum that you'll be hearing a lot. Maybe this is what it means to be stream safe. There is voice acting in the form of scripted lines during the flight parts of your gameplay, which does make some sense as you'll likely be looking at other things while flying. Still, most of the written dialogue in the game is while you're in between missions on your carrier, and the main sound you'll hear there is the ship's constant hum, and whatever instrument that's supposed to be. The only voice line you'll hear there is Lauren telling you don't have enough salvage points. In Frontier's Reach, you're expected to use audio cues to tell if enemies or friendlies are nearby by listening to the radio chatter. This is fine in practice, and a concept I hadn't seen executed before, but you will hear your wingman say the same lines over and over and over. While we're at it, I think one of the wingmen read her line as, "This is call sign," which probably should have been placeholder text for her call sign.
Radio siren, this is call sign checking in.
Enemy spotted.
Enemy spotted.
Enemy is on my target. I've got a tail!
I mentioned how the buttons lack feeling. I know it's a video game, but each panel just feels extremely two-dimensional, even as they slide onto the screen when you navigate via the buttons. There's no weight to any of the items you click on. Everything slides into place so neatly and perfectly, but when compared with the retro look, it enters that uncanny valley area. You don't expect something that dingy color to have perfect alignment, or those rust-colored buttons larger than a $50 to be pressed with the same sound as a button the size of a pinky. You can paint your ship, but only by selecting predefined patterns from a drop-down menu if you care about how your plane looks. Which you might, because the game flies pretty well with the mouse and keyboard if you're in third-person view. The game seems to have trouble remembering which ships you've painted and how you painted them, but this can be worked around by saving the paint customization so you can load it every time you select your ship. When viewing anything that requires scrolling, flipping to another topic maintains your scroll depth. Whether that's the bottom of one mission briefing or one missile, if you switch to something else, you need to scroll all the way back up just to read whatever the game's trying to tell you. There's a story here, and I can generally find some measure of enjoyment in any game story I get to sample. However, Frontier's Reach falls victim to essentially what I call talking head syndrome. You have static, monochromatic images of a person's face next to a paragraph of exposition, and are introduced to a ton of people who can only be spoken to at very specific intervals. If you're meant to develop an interest in these characters, the game shoos you away by making sure you aren't allowed to speak to them, except only when the plot demands it, so they really do only exist to convey you along with the story. The character only ever speaks during text dumps, and I'm not sure the story would change much if you lobotomized him out of the script. The game is absolutely filled with misspellings, but it's ignorable.
Any facility with the capacity to service a launch fighter-sized or larger craft is a good candidate. Let's start with the big ones first.
If you harass everyone often enough, you will find some extra missions waiting for you. An extra round of proofreading and a team of voice actors for Inside the Carrier would have really paid off here. The main voices you'll be hearing throughout the game is the carrier's computer system telling you to go to the next waypoint.
I'll mark the location on your HUD. Proceed to the next location on your HUD. Marking the location on your HUD now.
And your ship, telling you your altitude is too low.
1. Engage!
La Torre is notorious for its harsh conditions.
Altitude.
The game made it a very big deal in the first mission that you should
Altitude.
fly low to avoid detection. I'd rather crash into the floor than hearing that
Altitude.
over and over. Even if you start a mission from high up in the sky,
Altitude.
2.
you will get at least one
1.
altitude,
Altitude.
because it detects your carrier while in an atmosphere.
Altitude.
If Frontier's Reach primary companion is going to be a computer voice, he should adopt a personality, really sell it. As a writer, ask what makes this computer any different than a fresh off-the-factory Ford
Collision
computer.
warning.
But really, it would be best if we had a real actor here. Lorne, the computer's AI, is the primary lens into Frontier's Reach. Even when it doesn't make any sense for him to be interjecting and speaking, he's the one who's speaking.
I'm picking up a transmission from one of the Monarchy fighter pilots. Patching it in.
This is Lieutenant Esmeralda Windsor of the Bridgerton Monarchy. My squadron has been completely wiped out. Is anyone out there?
This is Lorne, mainframe AI for Helios Island. We're on location and ready to provide assistance for anyone who can help us get the royal family to safety.
What do you mean, get the royal family to safety? Who is your captain?
My captain is Anya Zuber, friend of the royal family.
Incoming.
Zainzy.
Incoming.
No captain.
Incoming.
I know the stories of your captain
Incoming.
told by our press. If you're here to get the royal family to safety, then it is my duty to assist.
Incoming.
We have 2 pilots and a ground team.
Incoming.
Form up on them. You have a call sign.
Call sign at 2.
Right. You've got another fighter on your way.
Incoming.
The story matters very little here, as everything takes place inside your little computer panels. Just finished escaping death? Here's a little face, with some text next to it, with some pre-written dialogue that doesn't matter what you've done or who you've talked to. Enjoying a drink at the bar or lamenting the loss of a loved one? Here's another little face with all the same caveats as before. Whether you're proud, scared, happy, or sad, one screenshot of dialogue would be indistinguishable from another. I felt the best story was the one-use scenario where you're just learning how to fly in a tutorial stage, then very hostile and very large ships suddenly invade your planet. You could merge a lot of the cast, such as key figures of Captain Anya Cherie Zubin, First Mate Ren Malovic, and Major Ramirez into one role and very little would change. There's a whole cast of side characters that appear in the galley at pre-scripted times and disappear into the void when they don't have any lines thrust upon them. The developer's latest post on September 24th mentions Wing Commander as a source of inspiration for the interface. Another page from Wing Commander make a few canned scenes you can frame your briefings around. It will go a long way to making any pre-flight phase matter more to the player, but as it is right now, everything in between flights is just an obstacle on the way to jumping back in the cockpit. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is the game's salvage system. With each kill you score in a mission, you earn points that can be spent on your next ship, gun, missile type, or modifications for your next life. If you don't crash and burn, you won't have to pay salvage points for what you've picked out. Either way, there's little to be had in progression other than racking up a bigger bank account. If you pay careful attention to the briefing, you have an idea of what to expect in each mission, such as if you want to equip large unguided warheads or clusters of tracking missiles. But the pacing between each mission is still wildly imbalanced. After saving a member of royalty, now orphaned, by knocking 2 carriers out of the sky, I am immediately sent on a mission to chisel a couple stationary asteroids in the name of mining.
Well, I suppose it was inevitable we'd be shooting space rocks at some point.
What's the matter, Blitz? Not a fan of the grind?
I was as
Followed by an unsurprising ambush of half a dozen fighters that are taken out in a single shot each.
Keep the drone safe while it doesn't work. I'm already detecting hostiles incoming.
After losing an important and valued member of the crew, our fighter is tasked with following a salvage robot around. This may be meant to be a break in the action or to represent realism in the name of life being dull while in hiding, but it could just as easily have been put as textual exposition by one of the numerous talking heads.
Incoming.
Although Frontier's Reach may be rooted in being less arcadey, the open salvage point system means you can throw away your money on any one of the missile types, but at the same time you've seen everything there is to see in the first few missions. Given the science fiction nature of the game and the emphasis on selecting the right loadout, some theoretical damage displays for your targets would be ideal, such as showing a missile spread with their blast radii overlaid on target buildings while you're in the room specifically, or showing you the mission briefing and map. This way you continue allowing the player to have the complete freedom to kit themselves as they see fit. Be warned, losing your fighter on a mission will re-kit you immediately, costing you additional salvage points even if you abort the mission. I think allowing the player to access the ship equipment interface while you are respawning or resupplying would be a great addition to the game, allowing you to adapt to situations on the fly. During missions where it specifically says a resupply is available, the default key, number 4, will ask your carrier for permission to dock. You probably won't see this feature until you've reached the warmap phase, after Chapter 25 or Veteran Start.
Collision warning.
Now for your missiles. Lock onto the next group of fuel tanks and take them out with your missiles on the next pass. Not too shabby, but we've got to get on the move. The reaction force we anticipated is on its way here. Proceed to the next location on your HUD.
As for the missions themselves, there's a definite skill cliff you'll run into on your very first mission. The game mercifully allows you to magically respawn because the developer has acknowledged that players might need the extra help, but expect to be eating a lot of dirt until you can fly through a cavern for no other reason than the story says so. I've flown over those same mountains and into the enemy turrets, and it was far safer than the mandatory objective cave run, which I'll be using as the front and foremost example of the difficulty curve, because that is the front and foremost example of a mission. I think this would have been a lot better served if this was saved for later in the campaign, and the player was given the optional choice to use low-altitude flights with a payout at the end beyond having fewer threats, as each target is money for you to use if you literally want to fly anything other than the free starter ship. From the developer posts, it seems I arrived in time to enjoy a series of tutorials. I can only imagine a sheer rock wall that was the difficulty curve if people picked up this game without those. Before you can attempt the cave run, you have to demolish several ground targets, which would only serve to frustrate people trying to practice that specific cave run. The feeling I got from this mission was that this was everything the developer wanted to showcase, but it is delivered to the player at the wrong time and in the wrong way, like a greasy bacon pizza right before bed. Rather than tack on more hypothetical scenarios in the form of a disconnected tutorial, I think there still needs to be additional flight time during story-based missions between starting the game and the initial cave run. When balancing a game, you also need to consider how much the player will have learned before reaching that point. The developer has stated very clearly that this game isn't for the casual gamer, but at the same time, Frontier's Reach is missing the features that a veteran gamer would anticipate and appreciate. As a flight simulator, Frontier's Reach does the piloting part very well, but the gunnery section has some areas it can improve upon. From ships to buildings, most of your combat is against tiny enemies that you can barely see and will require a direct hit. And when the enemy is larger than a pixel, they still might be obscured by a green square or a red triangle. At the end of each mission you have to dock at your carrier. It is obscured by a green diamond. I mentioned before that missiles are my go-to strategy. I enjoyed the game's depth a lot more once I studied each ship and missile type carefully, writing down information that the game does not present to you. Though each ship is at least labeled with a role that the developer planned for it. The first fighter, the Wild Boar, is free. Get used to piloting this, because messing up in any other vehicle will literally cost you. The other 10 ships range from nearly 1,600 to 9,000 salvage points. Remember that each mission varies wildly in what threats will appear, but you can typically assume that each target will net you 250 points. I'll share my thoughts on each ship and missile after the review is concluded. While I know flight simulator enthusiasts will demand a joystick in their hands and pedals at their feet, Frontier's Reach is absolutely learnable with a mouse and keyboard if you're willing to practice a little. The first hour I spent with the game was a mixture of frustration and boredom. First, your computer tells you to go to a waypoint. Then you wait at the waypoint until enough code happens that an enemy wave approaches your location. It won't necessarily be in range of your radar, other than looking for movements and trails in the distance. Smoke that squadron and repeat. Sitting in the cockpit became a little more interesting once we picked up some wingmen who could chatter back and forth to the computer to fill the time. But I think having a voice protagonist during the missions would have added that flavor without waiting for your roster to fill up. When creating your pilot profile, the game lets you choose a background. I'd rather choose to be part of the story. I've been playing flight simulators since Microprose's 1986 release of Gunship, so I'd like to think that I have some credibility for the genre. Trivia for you, Sid Meier's name is credited as one of Gunship's 4 designers. I can absolutely appreciate the developer's vision for wanting to break away from a standard mold, but he should still try to apply methods that have been developed since that era. You wouldn't insist that firing is done with the right mouse button just to be contrarian and then expect to be lauded for that, would you? Thankfully, the developer's latest post since writing this script takes a step back to say that he will listen to feedback, but the previous post gave the image of drawing his line in the sand on how development would go. Unsurprisingly, my favorite missions are the ones where you blow up big targets. Frontier's Reach treats each large ship as having several destructible properties on it, and this is something the game does better in the space sim category, though I doubt shooting down individual engines makes a target ship move any differently yet. My least favorite missions are ones where the scripting breaks because you're literally too good and you kill enemies before conditions can be properly flagged, or when the capital ships you're fully capable of taking down are flagged as non-destructible in the mission code. What was probably the most important story beat of the game, in Stand By Me, was ruined by me floating aimlessly in space until I ran out of fuel because according to the game code, I needed to have let my mothership become disabled. I had pressed such an overwhelming advantage against the enemy carrier that I actually hid my ship in a nearby space station and closed my eyes for a few minutes on the couch because being a parent I did not get a good night's sleep, and I'd been flying for a good while with almost nothing to do. Once I looked at the game code for that mission, I restarted the map and intentionally did not do my best. The game flowed as normal, but the in-game emotional tragedy that was about to occur was absolutely underscored by the fact I just wanted to move on by this point. Once you've had your fill of the story, the game is able to show you its best if you either reach the 26th chapter or you start a new pilot and check the veteran box. Soliloquy offers broad concepts on the Steam forums for a frustrated user on the first mission, which the game itself describes as a milk run, advising him to do a flyby of the target area and look around, telling him to learn how to identify targets, and pointing out the instruments in the cockpit to help him further. In a video game medium, I would recommend these aspects be included as part of the game if the developer truly advocates that these methods contribute to a player's success. Beyond that, I would absolutely retool the missions to guide the player to develop the level of skill and competency the missions demand. Later missions can be absolutely simple compared to this milk run, which not only requires tight control right off the bat, but also more numerous targets than in future missions. Other than the first mission, I think that the difficulty is actually fairly easy. The game generously allows you to respawn. Once you've reached the warmap, you can get passive income in salvage points, and the starting free vessel is not a floating piece of garbage. Yes, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but that's what you pay for. For me, the greatest difficulty was enduring the repeated missions, because I at least wanted to give the story a chance. So everything that wasn't a story mission just felt like a chore, which puts the difficulty in kind of an odd category. The game is at its best when it's actiony, but the developer doesn't want to make an arcade shooter, which I've not really heard that term before making this video. The game was simple, except that first cave run felt really out of place. What I'd really like to see are more obstacles and progression for the warmap phase, basically all the stuff that happens outside the cockpit. Once you get to the warmap phase, you need to complete a certain number of random missions against the Confederacy, not against the Independents. That doesn't score you anything.
No rest for the wicked, no rest for the good. Let's go save some folks.
Other than problems retaining my paint configuration and one crash, I hardly ran into any bugs in the game. Most cases of airtime ran surprisingly well on my machine. However, during important moments, such as facing a city or carrier, I did experience more than the usual slowdown. My preferred method of clearing the skies was using missiles while tracking them with a radar fan, so it didn't particularly affect my combat effectiveness. But I think the choppiness may have something to do with the fact that the mission seemed more based around the existence of a map than the map being made for the mission. The first several missions you fly on are all in the same map, and at any point you can fly to another part of the map for a future mission and score some easy salvage points. Since each mission is a self-contained scenario, but each map plays the host to several missions, it means there's going to be a lot of objects loaded on each flight that you will probably never even see if you play normally. Beyond that, the developer says that his game simulates physics for nearly everything in the game, which wouldn't help smoothness any. The game lacks a mission replay menu, by which I mean missions you have completed make no sense to return to from a storyline viewpoint, so it doesn't exist. To replay any mission without backing up or modifying the save files means playing the whole campaign over. The game is at its best when flying around destructible objects, and believe me, there can be a lot of downtime between those. The developer describes this game as having 32 story missions, 15 side missions, and a dynamic warmap with over 2,000 different scenario variations. But any differences there might have been didn't make a second playthrough feel any different than the first. He wrote that he expects to one day have some level of multiplayer functionality in the form of you playing a map in single player, with your completion data being tracked and shared with others to affect their maps. The major post proudly says that Frontiers Reach is going its own way, and if you're looking for experiences more like other games, to go play those other games. He doesn't say this in any sort of condescending way. At least that's not the way I interpret it. I feel like he's saying he has a vision for what his game will look like, and it's not going to compromise on certain fundamental things that might make it similar to other games. What those important fundamental things are, I wasn't able to identify, other than him wanting something true to military practices, disagreeing with an arcade feel for the game, and having a story about an asymmetrical war that leaves you trying to pick up the pieces to escape, rather than trying to win it. I'm here to describe what I feel makes Frontier Reach good and what makes it bad as a video game product, and this won't always line up with one man's vision. But I wholly support Soliloquy wanting to mold his dream into reality. One thing to note is that learning from others, be it learning music, writing, painting, or game design, doesn't mean you lose your unique identity.
Wiped out. Is anyone out there?
The developer himself is very responsive on the forums, and I've seen requests be promised to be fulfilled in the next patch. This personal and immediate handling is typically positive, such as adding a cockpit viewpoint, offering VSync, disabling screen static, or clarifying a dangling plot thread in the tutorial. I've noticed where the responsiveness allowed for a situation to become escalated rather than smoothed over. Frontiers Reach is Soliloquy's baby, and even I dream to be able to one day have the ability to make my own game. Given the large difficulty curve at the beginning and the independent direction the game chooses to go in, frustrated players have happened and will continue to happen. There isn't a parachute there to help them when they need it most. If we don't want to compromise in the game's direction, then the first 3 missions need to be polished until you can see yourself in the crow. While passion is crucial, a broader objective look at things can lessen the rough patches players are encountering. Frontiers Reach is an ambitious attempt to blend atmospheric and space combat with a more grounded and tactical approach, crafted by a passionate developer who isn't afraid to break away from genre conventions. The game offers moments of tactical depth, bogged down by a steep learning curve, repetitive mission structure, and an interface that can feel cumbersome rather than intuitive. You want to know the difference between a 3-pylon dumbfire volley versus a 12-pylon unguided salvo when deciding your loadout? The only way the game lets you know is if you get in the plane and fire one. The sound design is functional, but the harassing beeps and klaxons detracts more than it adds, almost to the point where I'd play with the sound off. But there is something about hearing my ship take damage, or the woof of enemy ships as they go down that I want to hear. The story suffers from a lack of depth in character engagement from every person you meet, including your own character. However, it's clear that the developer has been committed to improving the experience, actively engaging with the community and addressing feedback in real time. Suggestions to the game are regularly implemented, but the focus for both developer and player seems to be on the flight simulator aspect, not everything else in between. For those willing to navigate its quirks, dated design elements, and uneven pacing, Frontiers Reach does offer responsive controls and a responsive developer. Soliloquy has finished carving out the statue in terms of major development. The game still needs a lot of detail in order to properly share that passion and enjoyment with others. If I were to boil it down to 3 actionable items for the developer, it would be to liven up the carrier interface and interactions, overhaul the sound system, and make each ship and weapon a bit more distinct from one another. Frontiers Reach is rough around the edges, but as a flight simulator, still needs another layer of polish to truly reach the frontier. In a standard game, we'd begin by first speaking about the ships. However, I think it's better to understand what the ships will do for you, so we'll need to begin with the weapons instead. To that effect, let's roll out the cannons. Cannons show up in 3 flavors. From the fastest to the slowest, they are the Autobolt, Energy Ejector, and Tor Cannon. Only the Autobolt is free. Instead of having ammo, you instead fire by using heat like in Battletech. Cannons are affected by gravity, so pay attention to your reticle. While firing, you will see the outer circle segments begin rotating. You'll be back at 100% readiness if they settle to the left and right sides. If you fire until you can't fire any further, you'll be placed under a forced cooldown when your reticle turns red. This is probably a bug and might get patched in the future if the developer sees this video, but if you keep holding down the fire button while it's on forced cooldown, you will stay on forced cooldown. The duration varies based on the ship, modules, and weapon used, but you can expect to be on cooldown between 3 to 7 seconds. Much too uncomfortably long for you to be staring at your opponent. I first determined the fire rate of each cannon by counting how many shots you had and how long it would be until the forced cooldown. Then I recorded the recharge time, though it varied a little bit due to human error about holding the trigger down. Finally, I combined the volley time and the full recharge time to figure out how many shots average per second, which is ultimately an unhelpful metric, as your accuracy has vastly more influence on your damage per second. It took me 35 hits with an autobolt to destroy a gun tower, 12 hits with an energy ejector, and 7 hits with a torque cannon. The Wakizashi needs 3 hits to take down a gun tower, and I'm assuming the game's telling me the correct information about it doing 15 damage. I also tried the Morningstar, which is listed at 30 points, and I can finish off the gun tower with 5 autobolts. So that's correct at least. The last internal weapon, the Dumbfire Grunter missile, also lists 30 damage, but it takes out a gun tower in a single hit, so I'll try to stick to my relevant inferences. With this information, I guess that an autobolt does 1 damage, an energy ejector does 3, and a torque cannon does 7. The gun tower will be destroyed in that many hits for the 3 cannons, the Wakizashi, and the Morningstar if we work with the autobolt doing 1 damage each until the 35th hit. If you trust my judgment, then go with the following. For all ships with 2 guns, use the autobolt. That's the Wild Boar, Myrmidon, Shuriken Ultra, and Shepherd. For everything else, use the energy ejector. Autolotto has 1 gun, the Vector has 3 guns, the Shield, Hellfire, and Hoplite have 4 guns, and the Condor has 6. All 3 internal missile types are free. They are the Wakizashi, Grunter, and Morningstar. The Wakizashi and Morningstar use lock-on targeting, with the Morningstar relying on you to keep facing your opponent. You carry twice as many Wakizashi as you do Morningstar, and the Wakizashi also does half the damage. Even though they even out the same in terms of damage done, keep in mind that overkill damage is wasted. Many enemy ships will die to 1 Wakizashi, meaning they will die to 1 double-strength Morningstar. Finally, the Wakizashi has a longer pursuit time and does not require you to face your enemy. Use the Grunter if your mission is up against only static targets and you can reliably hit them. If not, use the Wakizashi from the beginning to the end of the game. A good way to build your skill is to aim 1 Wakizashi at each target, then pursue it with your cannons until the Wakizashi is confirmed to hit or miss. If the target is still alive, fire another Wakizashi. The game is kind enough to tell you how many internal missiles each ship uses. The Wild Boar, Shuriken, Hoplite, and Shepherd can all pack 40 missiles, with the Myrmidon, Vector, Shield, Hellfire, Krut, and Condor packing 60. The Autolotto boasts an unmatched count of 80. There are 6 types of light weapons, and all of them cost points. I don't know in what manner the development team has ordered these weapons, but the order they are in is as follows. Grimace, Falconeer, Caster, Hammer, Futago, and Hog. It's almost from cheapest to most expensive, with the Caster being the odd one out. The Grimace and Caster are dumbfire missiles. Assuming forward momentum, the Grimace will fire 3 missiles in a straight line moving forward. Due to the triple shot and the blast radius, this makes hitting static targets slightly easier than with a cannon, but you are limited to a small handful of these per resupply or life, making them almost pointless. The Caster is even worse, firing a horizontal group that looks extremely impressive, but it cannot even take out forward-moving drones, let alone manned aircraft that move erratically. Forget these 2 missile types exist. What's left are the Falconeer, Hammer, Futago, and Hog. Due to the blast radius, the Falconeer isn't bad against capital ships, and you can carry a good amount of it. The Hammer is convenient for hitting specific ground targets as long as there isn't a ceiling overhead. The Futago fires up to 3 missiles at a time, quickly depleting a large count of them. The Hog has a massive 50-second timer, and doesn't require you to lock on anyone. That also means you can't guarantee who it will aim for. Even with all of these specialties, the Futago is a good all-around missile that you'll be able to use in almost any situation. From what I've been able to write down, the Grimace, Caster, Hammer, and Hog are carried in low quantities. The Shepherd can carry 2, the Condor 3, the Wild Boar, Myrmidon, Shield, Hellfire, Hoplite, and Kruk 4, and everything else 6. For the Falconeer, double whatever your ship can carry. For the Futago, triple whatever normal amount you can carry. The Futago will deduct 1 from your animal counter for every missile you fire. That may sound self-explanatory, but remember that the Grimace and Caster fire multiple rounds at the cost of 1 unit. It is for this reason that Futagu is still usable even if you have less than 3 lock-ons. Now the salvage costs are all over the place. For the heavy missiles, we've got the APM, the Grindo, the Grimace and Castor again, the MPB, and the Quanto Storm. With the exception of the Quanto Storm, these are all dumbfire, meaning no lock-on. The Grimace and Castor are basically the same, just with more rounds. As I've expressed with regards to cannon shots and the light version of these weapons, if they don't hit anything, it's just a waste. The mission status in the top left and the tutorial message in the top right are just me making changes to the first map of the game to help you tell what ordnance are being used in each clip. These heavy weapons will take a little longer because we are dropping a slower moving bomb rather than a rocket propelled weapon, and then deliberately watching the destruction so we can get an idea of how useful it is. The APM will destroy anything it touches, but for reasons we'll discuss soon, it is outclassed by the Quanto Storm. That orange rotating sphere below our ship is our projected attack. The Grendo is unreliable, but good if you just need to do a little bit of damage to something in a wide area. If there were ever a time you needed to burn down a city block, you'd use this. The MPB drops 3 bombs in close proximity to each other, which totals up to 50% more damage than the APM if they all hit the same target. The bombs are too close together to hit more than a couple very adjacent targets, and it's likely the first bomb will do all the work. In the version of the game I was making this video for, the ammo counter was 3 times the normal amount of heavy weapons because this fires 3 bombs. It has since changed, but I'm leaving my data as it is for future mathematical applications with regards to individual attacks. Finally, there's the Quanto Storm. Not only does this baby utilize a lock-on, but it has the largest blast radius of anything we've seen yet. It doesn't do as much damage as the APM, but the sheer range is able to collapse a lot of material. Given that capital ships are destroyed by taking down specific targets on them, rather than doing big damage to the frame, the Quanto Storm can hit a lot more targets than any of the other heavy weapons. I know I already mentioned the lock-on, but it bears repeating. You only get to carry a few heavy weapons, and it would royally suck to miss with one. Unless you have a specific need, pack the Quanto Storm. The Myrmidon and Vector can carry 1 heavy munition, 3 for the multiple package MPB. Wild Boar, Shuriken, Hellfire, Autolotto, Hoplite, and Condor can carry double that. The Kruk, triple, and the Shield and Shepherd can carry 6 salvos each. If you aren't able to process all of these different kinds of weapons, don't worry. Just pack the rapid-firing Autobolt, homing Wakizashi, spreading Futagu, and nuclear Quanto Storm, and you'll be fine for the most part. Now we get to the ships. You've heard me list how many of which kinds of munitions each ship can carry. I used that information to decide which ship I went for any given mission. While playing, I didn't make the grid I'm going to show you next, but while prepping this guide and trying to put all my random thoughts into a coherent script, it hit me. You want to pack a lot of light hammers with the best cannons you can carry? That'd be the Vector. See how easy that is? The Shield is best for the cannon's heavy combo, but it can assist with the light-heavy combo in a pinch. The Hellfire and Condor cover very similar roles, though the Hellfire is 1/3 the price, does half the damage in cannons, and is the fastest ship of all, which is 33% faster than the Condor. Other things to note. The Myrmidon is a very good upgrade to the Wild Boar for its cost. The cheaper Vector is better than the Shuriken in nearly every way, except it carries only 1 instead of 2 heavy munitions. The cheaper Shield is better than the Shepherd in nearly every way except for fuel and radar range, which could be useful when besieging enemy SAMs. The Hellfire is not just a direct cheaper version of the Condor, but it's also cheaper than the Hoplite by half, and it's just as good for the cost. If you're rich, the Autolotto will clear missions faster than anything else. And the Kruk sports the absolute best radar range and carries half as many munitions as the Shield and Shepard. Now, let's update that grid again. If you find yourself with way too many salvage points, then yes, go ahead and use the Condor instead of the Hellfire, but this list should see you through. This is the first time I tried to write a review. I don't really know what I'm doing, but if this video was informative to you in any way, it would mean a lot if you hit that like button. I wasn't ready for how much work I was going to put into this review to get all this extra footage and everything of the topics I was talking about. If Frontiers Reach interests you, it is available on Steam for $19.99. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.